What if I told you that the games we play today have roots reaching back thousands of years, not just as simple diversions, but as sacred acts that shaped the fate of empires? Picture this, a stone ball court deep in the jungles of Mesoamerica, where players weren't just competing for glory but for something far greater. Their game was a ritual, a dance between life and death, watched by kings and gods alike. This wasn't just sport, it was a mirror reflecting the very soul of a civilization. Across the globe, from the sun-baked plains of Greece to the misty valleys of ancient China, games were woven into the fabric of daily life in ways that might surprise you. They decided political alliances, honored deities, and even determined the fate of harvests. Think of the Olympic Games born not as a spectacle, but as a sacred offering to Zeus, where victors were crowned with olive branches and celebrated as heroes. Or consider the Native American stickball matches, which could last for days and were played not just for fun, but to resolve conflicts between tribes. These weren't mere pastimes, they were threads in the tapestry of human history. So why do these ancient games still captivate us? Because they reveal a truth about who we are. Whether it's the thrill of competition, the bond of teamwork, or the longing to connect with something greater, these rituals speak to a universal human impulse. Over the next 28 stories, we'll travel through time to uncover the hidden meanings behind these games, how they inspired legends, forged identities, and even changed the course of history. By the end, you'll never look at a soccer match or a marathon the same way again. The echoes of these ancient contests are all around us, if you know where to listen. Ready to step onto the field of history? Let's begin. Imagine a game so intense that the stakes weren't just points on a scoreboard, they were life itself. In the heart of Mesoamerica, the ball game known as pits or ulama was more than a test of skill. It was a cosmic drama played out on stone courts that echoed with the footsteps of gods. These courts weren't just playing fields, they were sacred spaces, often built at the center of cities like Chichen Itza or Copan. Their towering walls carved with scenes of players locked in a ritual as old as the civilizations themselves. The ball, made from solid rubber and weighing as much as 8 pounds, wasn't just a toy. It was a symbol of the sun, hurled across the court with hips, elbows, and knees, no hands allowed. Players wore protective gear, but the game was brutal. Legends say the victors were celebrated like heroes, while the losers, well, some historians believe they paid the ultimate price. Their sacrifice wasn't just about punishment. It was an offering to the gods, a way to ensure fertile harvests or military victories. Kings even played to demonstrate their divine right to rule, proving their strength and connection to the gods in front of thousands of spectators. What's astonishing is how deeply this game was woven into everyday life. Ball courts were as common as temples, and the game's imagery appeared everywhere, from pottery to murals. Archaeologists have found rubber balls in ancient graves, some dating back over 3,000 years, showing how central this ritual was to Mesoamerican culture. And believe it or not, echoes of the game still survive today. In a few remote Mexican villages, descendants of the Maya and Aztecs play a version called Ulama, keeping alive a tradition that once decided the fate of empires. This wasn't just a sport, it was a language, a way to speak to the gods, to settle disputes, to prove worthiness. When you see modern athletes competing under stadium lights, remember the roar of the crowd, the tension of the game, the hunger for victory. It all began on those ancient stone courts, where every bounce of the ball carried the weight of the heavens. While the Mesoamerican ball game was a matter of life and death, halfway across the world, another ancient tradition was taking shape, one that would become the blueprint for modern athletic competition. In the Valley of Olympia, beneath the shadow of Mount Kronos, the very first Olympic Games began in the year 776 before the Common Era. But these weren't just sporting events. They were sacred festivals held in honor of Zeus, king of the gods. Imagine the scene: athletes from rival Greek city-states laying down their weapons to compete not for gold or silver, but for a simple wreath of olive leaves, a symbol of divine favor and eternal prestige. The games were a spectacle of human potential. Chariot races thundered around the hippodrome, horses and drivers pushing the limits of speed and skill. Wrestlers grappled in the pale, their bodies coated in olive oil and dust, while runners sprinted barefoot on tracks of packed earth. But it wasn't just about physical strength. The Olympics celebrated arit, a concept meaning excellence of both body and character. Victory wasn't just about crossing the finish line first. It was about embodying the ideals of discipline, honor, and respect. What's fascinating is how these games transcended sport. For the duration of the Olympics, a sacred truce called the Ekacharia was declared across Greece. Wars were paused, disputes set aside, and safe passage granted to all travelers. In a world of constant conflict, the Games became a rare moment of unity. City-states that were bitter rivals on the battlefield stood side by side in the stadium, cheering for their champions. The Olympics weren't just a competition, they were a diplomatic tool, a way to forge alliances and showcase cultural pride. And the athletes, they trained for years under strict regimens, often funded by their city-states. Cheating was unthinkable, not just because it was dishonorable, but because the penalties were severe. Fines were used to cast bronze statues of Zeus, inscribed with the cheater's name as a permanent warning. Winners returned home as legends, their victories celebrated with poems, statues, and even free meals for life. But perhaps the most enduring legacy is how this ancient tradition was reborn in 1896, reviving the Olympic spirit for the modern world. When you watch the opening ceremony today with its torch relay and olive wreaths, you're witnessing echoes of a ritual that began as a tribute to the gods. The Olympics remind us that some contests are about more than winning, they're about what it means to be human. Now picture this, a roaring crowd of 50,000 people packed into the colossal Colosseum, the air thick with dust and adrenaline as two gladiators face off in the arena's center. This wasn't just entertainment, it was theater, politics, and power distilled into a single, bloody spectacle. Gladiatorial combat was Rome's most infamous contribution to the world of ritualized games, a brutal yet carefully choreographed display of dominance that kept the empire's citizens loyal and its enemies fearful. These fighters came from all walks of life: enslaved warriors, prisoners of war, even volunteers seeking fame, but they shared one thing: their lives were no longer their own. Trained in specialized schools, gladiators were divided into classes based on their weapons and fighting styles. The Charioteers, with his trident and net, danced around the heavily armored Mirmillo, while the swift Secutor relied on speed to outmaneuver his opponents. But here's the twist: despite Hollywood's portrayal, death wasn't guaranteed. A skilled gladiator was a valuable asset, often worth more alive than dead. Owners invested heavily in their training, medical care, and even branding, turning them into recognizable stars. Surviving records show that some fighters lived through dozens of matches, their careers stretching years. The games themselves were grand political tools. Emperors and senators hosted them to win public favor, filling the schedule with ever more elaborate events. Morning might bring Venetian's hunts, where exotic beasts from across the empire were pitted against each other or against armed hunters. Then came the midday executions where criminals faced grotesque fates. But the main event, the Gladiators, crowds didn't just watch passively, they cheered favorites, placed bets, and even influenced outcomes. A defeated fighter could raise a finger in surrender, and the emperor, guided by the crowd's roar, would decide his fate with a thumbs up or thumbs down. What's often overlooked is the sheer scale of these spectacles. The Colosseum could be flooded to stage mock naval battles, complete with ships and combatants. Some events lasted for days, featuring thousands of gladiators and animals. The message was clear: Rome's wealth and reach were limitless, yet this extravagance carried a cost. As the empire declined, Christian opposition grew, and by the 5th century, the games were banned not out of sudden morality, but because their expense and brutality no longer served a crumbling state. But the legacy of the arena never truly faded. Modern sports, from boxing to professional wrestling, owe a debt to Rome's spectacles. The roar of a stadium crowd, the larger-than-life personas of athletes, even the way we turn competition into mass entertainment, it all traces back to those blood-stained sands. Gladiators may be gone, but their shadow lingers in every arena where skill and showmanship collide. While gladiators fought for glory in Rome's arenas, an entirely different kind of contest unfolded in the shadows of Egypt's pyramids. One played not with swords, but with pawns on a board. Meet Senet, the ancient game of the afterlife. Found in tombs dating back over 5,000 years, this wasn't just a pastime for bored pharaohs. It was a sacred ritual, a guidebook for the soul's journey through the underworld, carved into wood and painted on linen. Imagine holding a game piece that once belonged to Tutankhamun himself, its surface worn smooth by fingers that believed victory on the board meant favor from the gods. The rules of Senet remain a mystery, pieced together from fragments of texts and tomb paintings. Players moved pieces along a grid of 30 squares, using sticks or knucklebones as dice. But this was no simple race to the finish. Certain squares held divine significance. A crocodile might send you back, while the House of Rebirth offered a second chance. The final squares represented the moment the soul reached the realm of Osiris, god of the dead. Winning wasn't about luck, it was about proving you understood the hidden order of the universe. What's remarkable is how deeply Senet was woven into Egyptian spirituality. Pharaohs like Amenhotep III and Tutankhamun were buried with lavish sets made of ebony, ivory, and gold. Even ordinary citizens took painted boards to their graves, hoping to navigate the dangers of the afterlife. The game's imagery appeared in the Book of the Dead, showing the deceased playing against invisible opponents, perhaps the gods themselves. Some scholars believe Senet was more than symbolic. It may have been used by priests to predict fortunes or commune with the divine. And here's the twist: Senet evolved over centuries. Early boards were simple, but by the New Kingdom they became works of art, their squares decorated with hieroglyphs and cosmic symbols. The game spread beyond Egypt, reaching neighboring cultures like the Nubians, who adapted it to their own beliefs. Today, modern archaeologists still debate its exact rules, but one thing is clear: Senet was never just a game. It was a map of the afterlife, a tool for preparation, and a testament to humanity's oldest obsession: cheating death. When you roll dice in a board game tonight, remember, you're part of a tradition that once held the weight of eternity. Long before stadiums echoed with chants for modern soccer stars, a leather ball was already flying through the air in ancient China, kicked not by cleats, but by the silk-clad feet of emperors and warriors. This was Kooju, a game so beloved that it inspired poets, trained armies, and even crossed boundaries of gender and class. Picture the scene: courtyards of the Han Dynasty, 2,000 years ago, where players weaved between bamboo goals, their feet dancing with a ball stuffed with feathers and hair. No hands allowed, just pure footwork, a rule that would one day shape the world's most popular sport. Kooju wasn't just a game, it was a tool of empire. Military manuals from the time reveal how generals used it to drill soldiers in agility and teamwork, turning the courtyard into a training ground. But it wasn't all discipline. Emperors like Wu of Han were obsessed, hosting lavish tournaments where the best players earned titles and riches. Poets like Lai Yu wrote verses comparing the ball's flight to a moon gliding across clouds, elevating Kooju to an art form. And here's what's truly remarkable: women played too. Murals from the Tang dynasty show noble women in flowing robes competing alongside men, a rarity in a world of strict social hierarchies. The game's influence didn't stop at China's borders. Merchants and diplomats carried it east to Japan, where it evolved into Kemari, a graceful, non-competitive version played in cherry blossom-filled gardens. While Kemari focused on keeping the ball airborne cooperatively, Kooju's competitive spirit lived on, its DNA threading through centuries of ball games. In 2004, FIFA made it official, recognizing Kooju as the earliest form of soccer. What's fascinating is how little has changed. The thrill of a well-placed kick, the roar of a crowd, the way a simple ball can unite people across time. Kooju proves that some games are more than play. They're a language spoken in every corner of the globe, connecting us to those who came before. So the next time you watch a soccer match, remember, every pass, every goal, every moment of brilliance traces back to those Han Dynasty courtyards where a leather ball first took flight. The frozen fields of Scandinavia echoed with the thunder of bodies colliding, the sharp crack of wooden sticks, and the roars of warriors not in battle but in play. This was Knattleikr, the Viking game where honor was won not with axes, but with a hard leather ball and sheer brute force. Imagine a sport so intense that sagas like Egil Skallagrimssonar describe matches lasting for days, where broken bones were common and the line between competition and combat blurred. This wasn't just recreation. It was a training ground for life in the Viking world, where strength, strategy, and sheer stubbornness decided winners. The rules of Knattleikr are lost to time, but clues survive in ancient texts and carvings. Teams faced off on icy lakes or open fields, using sticks to pass and control the ball. Some historians think it resembled a chaotic mix of hockey, lacrosse, and rugby. Players wore no padding, and the ball, likely made of wood or hardened leather, could knock a man flat if hurled with enough force. What's fascinating is how deeply the game mirrored Viking society. Matches weren't just for fun, they settled disputes, showcased skill, and even served as courtship rituals. Sagas mention women watching from the sidelines, cheering for warriors who proved their worth on the field. But here's the twist: Knattleikr was more than a test of might. It demanded teamwork and cunning, qualities vital for Viking raiding parties. A player might be strong, but without coordination, his team would crumble just like a ship's crew in stormy seas. The game's brutality had purpose. Surviving a match meant enduring pain without complaint, a virtue celebrated in Norse culture. And the stakes, legends speak of feuds sparked by cheating or injuries, proving that for Vikings, play and war were two sides of the same coin. Today, Scandinavia's love for rugged sports like bandy or ice hockey carries whispers of Knattleikr's legacy. Reenactors in Iceland and Norway have revived versions of the game, guessing at its rules but capturing its spirit. When you watch a hockey player body check an opponent or a lacrosse team move in perfect sync, you're seeing echoes of those Viking fields, where every clash of sticks was a lesson in courage and every victory a tribute to the gods. The sagas may have forgotten the rules, but the hunger for competition, raw, unfiltered, and unyielding, lives on. among the bustling plazas of ancient Cahokia, where towering earthen mounds cast shadows over crowds. A game of chance and skill decided fortunes with the roll of a single stone. This was chunky, the sacred sport of the Mississippian people, a contest where spears flew, wagers piled high, and the line between sport and spirituality blurred into one. Picture the scene: a smooth, polished disc carved from quartz or slate, rolled with precision down a clay-packed court, while athletes sprinted alongside it, hurling long wooden shafts to mark where they predicted it would stop. The closest throw won, but the stakes were about more than points. Players bet everything: tools, crops, even their own freedom, in a game that mirrored the unpredictability of life itself. What made chunky so much more than a simple pastime? For the Mississippian cultures, the disc represented the sun's path across the sky, and the spears were like human efforts to align with destiny. The game wasn't just played, it was a living metaphor. Victory required keen eyes, steady hands, and an almost mystical sense of timing, qualities that mirrored a leader's ability to navigate the chaos of the world. Archaeological finds reveal just how central chunky was. Elite burials included ornate stone discs, some engraved with intricate designs, suggesting the game held spiritual weight. Chiefs and warriors were often depicted in art holding chunky stones, their status tied to their skill in the arena. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. As European colonizers pushed into native lands, chunky's decline became a symbol of something larger. Missionaries condemned it as gambling, while disease and displacement fractured the communities that had kept the tradition alive for centuries. By the 1800s, the game had nearly vanished, its stones buried in the earth like forgotten prayers. Yet whispers of chunky survived in oral histories, and today, indigenous scholars and artists are reviving it, not just as a game, but as a reclaiming of identity. Modern players speak of the eerie focus it demands, the way the rolling stone seems to pull you into its rhythm, connecting you to ancestors who once stood in the same way, spear in hand, chasing fate. When you think of high-stakes competition today, the spin of a roulette wheel, the tense silence of a poker table, remember chunky. It wasn't just about winning or losing. It was a ceremony, a test of intuition, and a reminder that life, like that rolling stone, rarely stops where we expect. The game's legacy isn't just in the artifacts left behind, but in the resilience of the cultures that refuse to let its spirit fade. Centuries before polo became the sport of aristocrats in sleek modern clubs, it was born on the dusty plains of ancient Persia, not as a leisure activity, but as a life or death training ground for warriors. Imagine 1,000 horsemen thundering across the field, their mallets swinging not at a ball, but at the skulls of enemy soldiers. This was the brutal origin of polo, known then as chogan, where Persian cavalry honed their agility, precision, and battlefield tactics. By the 6th century before the Common Era, it had evolved into a royal spectacle, with kings like Darius the Great and his successors playing in sprawling arenas, their matches watched by thousands. The game wasn't just entertainment, it was a display of power, proving a ruler's ability to command both horse and army. What made Persian polo so extraordinary was its demands. Players maneuvered at full gallop, wielding long-handled mallets carved from willow or mulberry wood, striking a ball made of woven leather or sometimes even the head of a fallen enemy. The field could stretch over 300 yards, requiring not just physical prowess but strategic brilliance. Teams functioned like military units, with players assigned roles: attackers, defenders, and scouts, mirroring the formations used in actual combat. Persian poets wrote of the game's grace, comparing players to falcons diving for prey, while historians noted its role in diplomacy. Ambassadors from rival empires were often invited to watch matches, a subtle reminder of Persia's unmatched cavalry. Then came the Silk Road, carrying polo far beyond Persia's borders. By the Tang dynasty, Chinese emperors had built lavish polo grounds in their capitals, and women of the court played in elaborate silk robes. In India, the Mughal emperors became obsessed, with Akbar the Great reportedly fielding teams of 300 players at a time. The game even reached Byzantium, where nobles played in hippodromes, and Japan, where it took on ceremonial significance. Every culture adapted polo to its own needs, but the core remained, a test of horsemanship, courage, and tactical wit. Today's polo may lack the battlefield stakes of its ancestors, but its regal aura endures. The clatter of hooves, the crisp strike of mallet on ball, the tradition of divot stomping at halftime, all echo a legacy that began with Persian warriors. When you see modern players in their pristine whites, remember, they're part of a lineage that once decided the fate of empires. Polo wasn't just a game. It was the sport of kings because in its heyday, only kings could afford to play it, and only the boldest dared to win. Beneath the arched roofs of Japan's sumo stables, where the air hums with chanting and the scent of sweat and sacred incense mingles, every movement carries the weight of centuries. Sumo isn't just a sport, it's a living ritual, a dance between human strength and divine favor. Its origins stretch back over 1,500 years, born not in arenas but in Shinto shrines, where wrestlers perform to entertain the gods and beg for bountiful harvest. Even today, when a rikishi steps into the dohyo, the ring of packed earth and straw, he's not just entering a competition. He's stepping onto sacred ground, purified by salt thrown in arcs like prayers made visible. The rituals surrounding sumo are as precise as the bouts themselves. Before a match, wrestlers clap to summon the gods, stomp to drive away evil spirits, and raise their arms to prove they carry no weapons. The salt they scatter, it's not just for show. In Shinto belief, salt cleanses and protects, a tradition so deeply ingrained that sumo stables go through nearly 90 pounds of it each tournament. Every detail, from the elaborate kesho mawashi aprons worn during ceremonies to the judges' black hats modeled after Edo period officials, ties the present to an unbroken chain of tradition. Lose these rituals and sumo loses its soul. But what truly sets sumo apart is its hierarchy, a microcosm of Japanese society. Wrestlers live together in communal stables, where even mealtimes enforce order. Lower-ranked rikishi eat last, sleep on futons closest to the door, and wash their seniors' backs in the bath. Promotion isn't just about winning, it's about embodying discipline, respect, and hinkaku, the dignity expected of a champion. When a yokozuna, the highest rank, ties his massive white rope belt and performs the sacred dohyo iri ceremony, he's not just a wrestler. He's a guardian of culture, expected to uphold ideals that date back to the age of samurai. Yet for all its tradition, sumo isn't frozen in time. Modern tournaments pack Tokyo's Ryogoku Kokujikan with fans roaring for underdogs and legends alike. Foreign wrestlers, like the Mongolian giants who dominated recent decades, have reshaped the sport while honoring its core. And when a match begins, two titans colliding in a blur of force and strategy, it's still the same elemental test it's always been. Raw power meeting ritual, tradition balancing on the edge of innovation. Sumo endures because it's more than a game. It's a mirror held up to Japan itself, reflecting how deeply the past lives in the present. In the shadow of Aztec temples, where the scent of copal incense hung heavy in the air, players hunched over brightly painted mats, their eyes locked on the roll of painted beans. This was Patoli, the game that could make you a king or leave you in chains, played on a cross-shaped board symbolizing the four cardinal directions. It wasn't just a pastime. It was a high-stakes dance with destiny, where every toss of the dice was believed to be guided by the capricious hands of the gods themselves. The rules were simple yet tense. Players moved colored pebbles along the board's 52 squares, a number sacred to the Aztec calendar, rolling marked beans as dice, but the real thrill lay in the wagers. Gamblers staked everything: jade necklaces, bolts of Quetzal feather cloth, even their own freedom. Historical accounts describe nobles betting entire orchards or enslaved servants on a single game, while commoners might gamble a season's harvest. To lose was devastating, but to win, that was proof of divine favor. The Aztecs saw Patoli as more than chance. It was a microcosm of life's unpredictability, a way to honor Macuilxochitl, the god of music and gambling, who could bless or ruin a player on a whim. What terrified Spanish colonizers wasn't just the gambling, it was the game's spiritual power. Missionaries burned Patoli boards alongside codices, recognizing them as portals to indigenous beliefs. The cross-shaped design mirrored cosmic maps, and the beans used as dice were ritually blessed. For the Aztecs, playing wasn't frivolous. It was an act of devotion, a way to align oneself with the universe's rhythms. Banning Patoli became a tactic to erase native spirituality, much like the destruction of ball courts farther south. Yet, like so many forbidden traditions, Patoli refused to die. Its DNA survives in modern Mexican games like La Loteria, where luck and symbolism still intertwine. Archaeologists have unearthed Patoli boards beneath Mexico City's streets, their colors still vivid after 5 centuries. And in some indigenous communities, elders whisper that the rattle of beans on wood can still summon the old god's attention. When you roll dice in a board game today, you're part of a chain that stretches back to those Aztec players who knew the truth. Fortune isn't just random. It's a force to be reckoned with. On the emerald fields of ancient Ireland, where mist clung to the hills and warriors trained for battle, a game was born from the clash of ash wood and the whistle of a speeding ball. Hurling isn't just a sport, it's a living relic of the Celts, a 3,000-year-old tradition where players wield kamon sticks like swords, and a sliota ball flies faster than a striking falcon. The legends say it all. In the Tain Bo Cuelnge, the epic saga of Irish hero Cú the boy's first feat wasn't slaying a monster or leading an army. It was picking up a hurley for the first time and outplaying every adult on the field, his skill so fierce it foretold his destiny as a warrior. That's the magic of hurling. It wasn't just a game, it was a trial by fire, a way to prove courage, agility, and the sheer will to survive. The rules were simple but unforgiving. 2 teams battled across open land, their kamons curved sticks carved from ash, used to strike, block, and even hurl the sliota through the air at dizzying speeds. Players wore no padding, and the ball, made of stitched leather stuffed with hair or cork, could break bones if caught wrong. Yet what's astonishing is how deeply hurling was woven into daily life. Chieftains used matches to settle territorial disputes, avoiding bloodshed by letting the game decide. Villagers competed in festivals, their pride tied to the outcome. And the skills honed on the field, they translated directly to warfare. The swift footwork, the hand-eye coordination, the ability to strike with precision under pressure, these were the same talents needed in battle. Fast forward to today, and hurling's spirit hasn't dimmed. Modern matches in stadiums like Croke Park draw roaring crowds. The game's pace so relentless it's often called the fastest sport on grass. Players still use ash wood sticks, still chase the same leather ball, still play with a ferocity that would make Kooju proud. But here's what's truly remarkable: hurling is still amateur. Most players hold day jobs, competing not for million-dollar contracts, but for the love of the game and the honor of their county. The All-Ireland final isn't just a championship, It's a pilgrimage where generations gather to cheer in Gaelic, keeping the language alive alongside the sport. Hurling's secret isn't just its speed or its history. It's the way it binds past and present, warrior and athlete, myth and reality. When you watch a player sprint down the field, the Sliota balanced on his stick like a bird in flight, you're witnessing something timeless. This isn't just Ireland's national sport. It's a thread connecting today's crowds to those ancient Celts who first raised their commands under stormy skies, proving that some games aren't just played, they're inherited. Buried beneath the sands of ancient Mesopotamia, a board game lay waiting for 4.5 millennia, not just any game, but the royal game of a treasure so cherished it was laid to rest with kings. Discovered in the 1920s by archaeologist Leonard Woolley in the royal tombs of this wasn't merely a pastime. It was a window into the minds of the world's first city dwellers, their beliefs carved into a wooden board inlaid with shell and lapis lazuli. Picture this: 2 players sitting cross-legged in a sunlit courtyard, their hands hovering over a board divided into 20 squares, some marked with rosette symbols of fortune, while tetrahedral dice clatter between them. The stakes more than points, this was a duel with destiny itself. What makes the royal game of so extraordinary isn't just its age, it's the fact we can still play it today. Unlike so many ancient games lost to time, this one left behind instructions. A cuneiform tablet from 277 before the Common Era, discovered in the ruins of Babylon, spells out the rules in meticulous detail. Players race their pieces from one end of the board to the other, their moves dictated by the roll of knucklebones or pyramid-shaped dice. But here's the twist: certain squares acted as shortcuts or traps, echoing life's sudden turns. Land on a rosette and you gained protection or an extra turn. Fall into an opponent's path and your piece was sent back to start. The message was clear: fate could bless or ruin you in an instant, a lesson every Mesopotamian understood. The game's reach was staggering. Boards have been found from Crete to India, carried along trade routes by merchants and soldiers. It wasn't just for royalty. Versions were scratched into clay tablets by schoolchildren and played in taverns by laborers. One particularly poetic tablet even records a young man's lament after losing. "I am ruined," he wrote, his despair immortalized in clay, but the game's true power lay in its symbolism. Scholars believe it mirrored the Mesopotamian vision of the soul's journey, the winding path through life's trials, where divine favor could change everything. And then there's the resurrection. In 2013, historian Irving Finkel staged a tournament at the British Museum, using the original rules deciphered from that ancient tablet. Visitors crowded around, watching as modern hands moved pieces across a replica board, proving the game's magic hadn't faded. Today, you can 3D print your own set or play it online, bridging 5,000 years with the roll of a die. The royal game of endures because it speaks to something universal, that mix of strategy and luck, control and chaos that defines the human experience. When you sit down to play Monopoly or backgammon, remember, you're part of a tradition that began when scribes first pressed tilus to clay and kings gambled under the shadow of ziggurats. Some games aren't just entertainment, they're time machines. On the volcanic shores of ancient Hawaii, where crashing waves mirrored the ferocity of battle, warriors didn't just fight, they danced. This was Lua, the island's secret martial art, where every twist of the body, every strike of the hand, carried the weight of tradition and the whispers of ancestors. Unlike the flashy combat styles of today, Lua was born in silence and shadows, its techniques passed down in hushed ceremonies, its movements named for the creatures of land and sea, the shark's bite, the hawk's swoop, the octopus's entanglement. To master Lua wasn't just to learn to fight, it was to become a living vessel of Hawaii's warrior spirit. The art's brilliance lay in its duality. On the surface, Lua resembled a dance, fluid, rhythmic, almost poetic. Warriors trained to the cadence of chants and drums, their footwork echoing the ebb and flow of the tide. But beneath the grace lurked lethal precision. Joint locks could snap bones with a flick of the wrist. Pressure points were targeted with surgical accuracy. Even the simplest gesture, like the brushing of a hand, could disguise a disarming technique. This wasn't showmanship, it was survival. With no metal weapons, Lua fighters turned their bodies into living weapons, using rocks, ropes, and even the sharp edges of seashells to defend their homes. The most skilled warriors, known as Koa, were said to move like the wind, unstoppable, invisible, leaving no trace but their impact. What's striking is how deeply Lua was tied to identity. Before battle, warriors performed rituals to call upon Omakua, their ancestral guardians. Certain techniques were reserved for specific lineages, their secrets guarded like sacred texts. When Captain Cook's crew arrived in the late 18th century, they dismissed Hawaiian combat as primitive until they witnessed its effectiveness firsthand. But colonization nearly erased Lua. Missionaries banned it, labeling it pagan. Families hid their knowledge in coded chants or disguised it as harmless games. For over a century, Lua survived only in fragments, a fractured legacy clinging to the edges of memory. Yet like the tides, Lua has returned. Today, practitioners across Hawaii are piecing together the art from oral histories, elder teachings, and even the notes of early ethnographers. Modern Koa don't just train in dojos, they study botany to rediscover the medicinal plants warriors used, or navigation to understand the spatial awareness their ancestors relied on. Competitions blend combat with cultural storytelling, and the once secret moves are now shared with pride, not to exploit but to heal. When a Lua fighter steps onto the sand today, their chant isn't just a war cry. It's a bridge across time, echoing the resilience of a people who refused to let their warrior spirit die. The dance of battle lives on, not for war, but for remembrance. Deep in the jungles of the Yucatan, where howler monkeys shriek from the canopy and ancient stone platforms rise from the earth, another version of the Mesoamerican ballgame took on a life of its own. This was Bull, the Mayan twist on a ritual so powerful, it wasn't just played on the court, but in the very heart of the underworld itself. Unlike its Aztec and Toltec counterparts, Bull wasn't merely a test of skill or a political spectacle. It was a cosmic conversation, a way for Mayan kings to prove they could navigate the treacherous realms of Xibalba, the place of fright, and return victorious. The courts where Bull was played weren't just sporting grounds. They were portals, carved with scenes of gods and serpents. Their sloped walls echoed the mythic ballgame from the Popol Vuh, the Mayan creation story. In that tale, the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, outwitted the lords of Xibalba in a game where the stakes were immortality itself. When a Mayan ruler stepped onto the court, he wasn't just reenacting that myth, he was channeling it. The ball's bounce mirrored the sun's journey through the underworld at night, and the players' movements were a carefully choreographed battle against darkness. Win, and the king reaffirmed his divine mandate. Lose, and his people might face drought, war, or worse, a sign the gods had withdrawn their favor. What's chilling is how literal this connection could be. At some sites, like Copan, carvings show rulers dressed as the hero twins, their elaborate headdresses adorned with symbols of resurrection. Archaeologists have found offerings buried beneath quartz jade beads, shattered pottery, even the remains of children, suggesting the game's rituals sometimes crossed into sacrifice. But here's the twist, not all losses ended in bloodshed. Some scholars believe certain matches were staged, their outcomes predetermined by priests who read the gods' will in the ball's erratic path. The game wasn't just played, it was scripted, a divine theater where every ricochet held meaning. Today, the most haunting remnant of Bull isn't in artifacts or texts, it's in the acoustics. Stand in the center of a surviving court like the massive one at Chichen Itza and clap your hands. The sound doesn't just echo, it mimics the cry of the Quetzal bird, a sacred creature linked to the spirit world. The Mayans engineered these spaces so that every strike of the ball, every cheer of the crowd became part of the ritual. When you walk those worn stone alleys, you're tracing the footsteps of kings who played not for trophies, but for the survival of their world. Bull wasn't a game, it was a prayer written in rubber and stone. In the sweltering heat of ancient India, where dust swirled over village squares and the echoes of epic battles lingered in the air, a game emerged that tested not just strength, but the very limits of human breath. Kabaddi, a sport as old as the Mahabharata itself, wasn't born in stadiums or royal courts. It began in the dirt, played by farmers and warriors who turned a simple game of tag into a high-stakes duel of endurance and strategy. Picture this, a lone raider, chest heaving, darting into enemy territory, his voice rising in a rhythmic chant, "Kabaddi, Kabaddi, Kabaddi," as he holds his breath, trying to tag as many opponents as possible before gasping for air. One moment of hesitation, one stolen breath, and the tide could turn in an instant. What makes Kabaddi so extraordinary is its brutal simplicity. No equipment, no elaborate rules, just two teams, a patch of earth, and the raw physics of lung capacity. The raider's chant isn't just tradition, it's a lifeline. If he stops repeating it, the turn ends. If he exhales before returning to his side, he's out. Ancient texts like the Mahabharata describe it as training for stealth and stamina, where warriors learn to move silently, strike swiftly, and endure pain without a sound. Villagers used it to settle disputes, and kings watched matches to scout talent for their armies. The game wasn't just play, it was a microcosm of war, where breath control meant the difference between victory and capture. Fast forward to today, and Kabaddi's essence hasn't diluted. Modern leagues like the Pro Kabaddi Championship pack arenas with roaring fans. The sport's pace so frantic it's been called the world's most intense tag game. Players still chant, still hold their breath, still wrestle in a blur of flying limbs and strategic grabs. But here's the twist, Kabaddi's gone global. Iran's wrestlers dominate with brute strength, South Korea's athletes master precision footwork, and even Argentina fields teams, proving the game's universal appeal. The rules haven't changed much in 4,000 years, yet somehow Kabaddi feels fresher than ever. Perhaps its magic lies in its democracy. Unlike polo or gladiatorial combat, Kabaddi requires no wealth, no weapons, just courage and a pair of lungs. When you watch a raider weave through defenders, his voice steady even as his body screams for oxygen, you're witnessing the same test of will that once prepared warriors for battle. Kabaddi isn't just a sport, it's a living echo of humanity's oldest challenge, to push beyond limits, one breath at a time. Beneath the golden sands of ancient Egypt, where pharaohs ruled and gods walked among mortals in legend, a game coiled like a serpent waiting to strike Mayan, the spiral board game named for the very snake deity who encircled the sun god Ra in protection. Picture this, a circular board divided into segments like the coils of a snake, its head at the center, where players guided lion-shaped pieces along the winding path. This wasn't just entertainment, it was a sacred journey mirroring the daily voyage of the sun across the sky and through the underworld, a dance of order against chaos. What sets Mayan apart from other ancient games is its haunting disappearance. Thriving during the Old Kingdom around 4,600 years ago, it vanished abruptly from tombs and art by the Middle Kingdom, a mystery that still puzzles archaeologists. Was it banned, replaced by newer pastimes, or did its religious significance fade with shifting beliefs? The few surviving boards, carved into stone or painted on pottery, offer tantalizing clues. The lion pieces, often found in sets of 3 or 6, may have represented celestial protectors, while the serpent's coiled body echoed the cyclical nature of Egyptian cosmology: death and rebirth, flood and drought, night and day. The rules of Mayan are lost to time, but scholars have pieced together possible gameplay. Players likely rolled dice or casting sticks to move their lions along the serpent's body, racing toward the center, the head where divine favor awaited. Some theories suggest it was a cooperative game where players worked together to navigate the serpent's path, warding off chaos just as Mayan the god shielded Ra from the monstrous Apophis. Others believe it was competitive, a symbolic battle between order and disorder, with the serpent's coils acting as traps or boons. What's fascinating is how deeply Mayan was tied to spirituality. Unlike Senet, which focused on the afterlife, Mayan seems to have celebrated the living cosmos, the eternal balance Maat required. Tomb paintings show nobles playing it in scenes of leisure, but also in ritual contexts, hinting that victory in the game might have been seen as an omen. And then there's the serpent itself, in a culture that both revered and feared snakes as symbols of protection, like the urias on pharaohs' crowns, and danger like Apophis. Mayan's design was no accident. To play was to engage with primal forces, to navigate the twists of fate under the watchful eye of the divine. Today, modern historians and game enthusiasts have resurrected Mayan, crafting replicas and testing theories. Rolling dice on a handmade board, they glimpse what an Egyptian noble might have felt 3 millennia ago. The tension of chance, the thrill of strategy, the quiet awe of touching something sacred. When you trace your finger along a replica spiral, you're not just following a game path. You're tracing the contours of an ancient mind, one that saw the universe not as a straight line, but as an endless coiled mystery waiting to be unraveled, one move at a time. On the frozen edges of the Arctic, where the horizon blurs into endless white, survival depended on more than strength, it demanded vision. The Inuit blanket toss wasn't just a game, it was a lifeline disguised as celebration. Picture a circle of hunters gripping the edges of a taut walrus hide blanket, their breath fogging in the icy air as they prepared to launch one of their own skyward. With a coordinated heave, the volunteer would soar high above the tundra, scanning the distant ice floes for the dark shapes of seals or the spout of a whale. In that suspended moment between earth and sky, the difference between feast and famine could hinge on a single glimpse. What's remarkable is how seamlessly necessity and joy intertwined in this ritual. The toss, called Nalukattak in some regions, was often performed after a successful hunt, a way to share both the labor and the reward. The strongest hunters would anchor the blanket, while lighter members, often children or agile women, took the daring role of spotter. But this was no grim duty. Laughter rang out as the flyer wobbled mid-air, and bets were placed on who could reach the highest point. The blanket itself was a communal treasure, crafted from the hides of the very animals it helped secure, its stitches a testament to shared survival. Today, the blanket toss has evolved into a centerpiece of Arctic sports festivals like Alaska's World Eskimo Indian Olympics, where competitors are judged not just on height, but on style, kicking their legs mid-air or striking poses as if defying gravity itself. Yet even now, the echoes of its origins remain. Elders teach the next generation how to read the wind's direction from their airborne perch, just as their ancestors did. The rhythm of the toss still follows the same chants that once coordinated hunters, and the blanket's construction, sturdy yet supple, honors centuries-old techniques. In a world where modern technology could easily replace tradition, the persistence of the blanket toss speaks volumes. It's a reminder that innovation and heritage aren't opposites. When a young Inuk flies upward today, they're not just performing for applause. They're retracing an arc through history, one that connects the practical to the profound. The blanket toss isn't merely a relic. It's a living act of resilience, a thread stitching past to present with every exhilarating leap into the boundless Arctic sky. Across the sun-baked earth of ancient Africa, where trade routes stretched like veins between kingdoms, a game was born not of carved pieces or painted boards, but of simple seeds and the hollows of the earth itself. Mancala, with its countless variations from Bao in East Africa to Ower in Ghana, isn't just a pastime. It's a living classroom where generations learned the art of strategy, their fingers flicking seeds like abacus beads, their minds calculating moves 3 steps ahead. Picture a market square in Timbuktu, where merchants paused between deals to challenge each other on wooden boards, or a village elder teaching a child to count not with chalk and slate, but with the rhythmic click of seeds dropping into pits. This was math made tangible, warfare without bloodshed, diplomacy in miniature. What makes Mancala extraordinary is its deceptive simplicity. The rules vary by region, but the core remains. Players scoop seeds from pits and distribute them counterclockwise, capturing opponents' seeds when they land in certain patterns. Yet beneath this straightforward surface lies a labyrinth of possibility. A single move can cascade into victory or ruin, much like the real-life decisions of farmers dividing harvests or kings allocating resources. Historians trace Mancala's origins back over 7,000 years, with evidence of game boards carved into the roofs of Egyptian temples and the floors of Aksumite palaces. It wasn't just played, it was woven into proverbs. The Akan people of Ghana say, "A wise man plays Ower, but a wiser man knows when to stop," blending gameplay with life lessons. The game's genius is in its universality. No seeds, use pebbles. No board, scoop pits into the dirt. This adaptability let Mancala ride the winds of trade and migration, morphing as it traveled. Arab D, how ships carried it to Sri Lanka, where it became Kong Kak. Enslaved Africans brought it to the Americas, where it survived in hidden forms. Even today, you'll find variations from the Philippines to the Caribbean, each with subtle shifts in rules reflecting local values. Some versions reward aggression, others patience. The math remains the same, but the metaphors change. In some cultures, the board represents a field, the seeds crops. In others, it's a battlefield, each capture a tactical triumph. Perhaps Mancala's greatest legacy is how it defies time. In Nairobi's tech hubs, programmers play mobile app versions during lunch breaks. In Senegalese schools, teachers use it to explain binary logic. When you watch 2 players hunched over a board today, their hands moving like clockwork, you're witnessing a chain unbroken since the dawn of agriculture. This isn't just a game. It's Africa's gift to the world, proof that the deepest strategies often grow from the humblest seeds. In the dust-choked arena of ancient Olympia, where the scent of olive oil mixed with sweat and blood, 2 figures collided with a force that shook the crowd, not as boxers, not as wrestlers, but as pancratiasts, masters of the most brutal combat sport ever devised. Pancration, meaning all powers, lived up to its name. With only 2 rules, no biting and no eye gouging, every other tactic was fair game. Fighters strangled, twisted limbs, and slammed opponents to the ground with a ferocity that would make modern MMA stars blanch. This wasn't just a contest, it was a trial by pain, where victory came only when one man raised his finger in surrender or lay motionless in the dirt. The origins of pancration blurred the line between myth and history. Some said Heracles himself invented it, using a blend of wrestling and boxing to subdue the Nemean lion. Others claimed it emerged from the battlefields of the Trojan War, where soldiers needed every possible advantage to survive. By 648 before the Common Era, it had become the Olympics' crowning event, a test of arete excellence that demanded not just strength but cunning. Fighters trained for years, their bodies hardened by sand-filled punching bags, and their minds sharpened by the knowledge that a single mistake could mean disfigurement or worse. The legendary Ahitian of Phegalia became immortalized not for his victories but for his final match. Though his opponent had him in a fatal chokehold, Ahitian dislocated the man's ankle with a last gasp twist, forcing surrender just as he took his final breath. The judges awarded him the olive wreath posthumously, his corpse crowned in glory. What's striking is how pancration mirrored Greek values. Unlike gladiatorial combat, which entertained the masses, this was a sacred trial. Fighters competed naked, their bodies gleaming with oil, to prove there were no hidden weapons, only skill and willpower. The sport's brutality wasn't mindless, it was a metaphor for life's struggles. To endure was to honor the gods, and to submit wasn't shameful if you'd given your all. Even philosophers like Plato praised pancration, seeing it as a path to self-mastery. Today, the echoes of pancration reverberate in every MMA octagon. When a fighter locks in an armbar or dodges a strike, they're channeling techniques depicted on ancient vases. Modern athletes might wear gloves and follow weight classes, but the essence remains, a raw, unfiltered test of human limits. The difference, today's fighters walk away. In ancient Olympia, many didn't. Pancration wasn't just the ancestor of martial arts, it was a mirror held up to the Greek soul, reflecting a truth as visceral now as it was then. True strength lies not in never falling, but in rising every time you're thrown to the ground. While gladiators dominated the Colosseum and chariots thundered through the Circus Maximus, another Roman game was stirring up chaos in army barracks and city squares. Harpastum, a brutal ball sport that blended the strategy of chess with the physicality of a bar brawl. Picture this, two teams of soldiers clashing on a dusty field, a small leather ball stuffed with wool or hair darting between them as players hurled themselves into tackles, dodged flying elbows, and wrestled for control with the same intensity they'd use on the battlefield. This wasn't just recreation, it was training disguised as play, a way to sharpen reflexes, build endurance, and forge the unbreakable teamwork that made Rome's legions unbeatable. The game's name, Harpastum, came from the Greek word harpaston, meaning to snatch, and that's exactly how it worked. Players passed the ball with swift, deceptive throws, aiming to keep it from the opposing team through sheer aggression and cunning. Unlike modern rugby, there were no set field boundaries or strict rules. Matches erupted spontaneously wherever there was space, in military camps, public gardens, even the marble courtyards of wealthy patrons. The poet Martial described noblemen returning from matches bruised and breathless, their tunics torn, yet grinning with the thrill of the fray. What made Harpastum revolutionary was its blend of tactics and chaos. Teams employed formations as precise as legionary battle lines, using feints and sudden charges to outmaneuver opponents. Soldiers trained in it to improve hand-eye coordination for swordplay and the stamina needed for long marches. But here's the twist, it wasn't just for warriors. Women played lighter versions, children adapted it with smaller balls, and even the elderly joined in gentler matches, proving the game's versatility. The legacy of Harpastum pulses through modern sports more than most realize. Its DNA lives on in rugby's scrums, American football's lateral passes, and even soccer's emphasis on quick, short plays. When you watch athletes today collide on a field, trading possession in a blur of motion, you're witnessing the echo of Roman soldiers who turned a simple ball game into a laboratory of strategy and strength. Harpastum wasn't just a pastime, it was Rome's secret weapon, proving that sometimes the best way to prepare for war is to play like your life depends on it. On a quiet afternoon in ancient China, two scholars sat across a wooden board, their hands hovering over a grid of 19 by 19 lines. The stones they placed, one black, one white, seemed simple, but with each move, they waged a silent battle of territory and influence that could last for hours. This was Go, a game so elegant in its design yet so boundless in its complexity that it became known as the surrounding game, or the Game of Wisdom. Invented over 2,500 years ago, likely during the Zhou dynasty, Go's rules can be learned in minutes. Place stones to claim territory, encircle your opponent's pieces to capture them, and control the board by balancing attack and defense. But mastering it, that could take a lifetime or longer. What makes Go extraordinary isn't just its age, but the way it mirrors the very fabric of existence. Taoist philosophers saw the black and white stones as yin and yang, opposing forces locked in harmony. Generals like Sun Tzu used it to simulate warfare, where patience and positioning trumped brute force. Emperors played to sharpen their strategic minds, knowing that the board's empty spaces represented infinite possibilities, just like the choices governing an empire. Even Confucius praised Go in his writings, calling it superior to frivolous pastimes because it cultivated virtue and discipline. The game wasn't just entertainment, it was a meditation, a way to train the mind to see patterns in chaos. Fast forward to today, and Go's allure hasn't dimmed. In 2016, the world watched in awe as AlphaGo, an artificial intelligence developed by DeepMind, defeated Lee Sedol, one of the greatest human players. The AI didn't just win, it played moves so unconventional, so creative, that seasoned professionals called them divine. This wasn't just a triumph of technology, it was a revelation. For centuries, Go had resisted brute force computation because its possible board states outnumber atoms in the observable universe. Yet here was a machine grasping its intuitive essence, proving that the game's depth still held mysteries humans hadn't unraveled. But here's the twist. Rather than rendering human players obsolete, AlphaGo reignited global fascination with Go. Clubs sprouted from Silicon Valley to Paris, and online servers buzzed with newcomers eager to learn the game that had humbled AI pioneers. Modern players study AlphaGo's matches like sacred texts, dissecting its unorthodox strategies for glimpses of unseen possibilities. The game's legacy endures because it's more than a contest, it's a conversation across millennia, a reminder that some challenges transcend time. When you place a stone on a Go board today, you're not just playing a game, you're touching the same lines that once guided emperors, philosophers, and now even machines in the endless dance of black and white. In the flickering firelight of a Viking longhouse, warriors hunched over a wooden board, their fingers tracing paths not for gold or glory, but for the fate of a king. This was Hnefatafl, the king's table, where strategy unfolded in the tension between unequal forces. Unlike chess's balanced armies, this game mirrored the asymmetrical chaos of Viking life, a lone monarch and his loyal defenders surrounded by a swarm of relentless attackers, each move echoing the raids and skirmishes that defined the Norse world. Unearthed from burial mounds across Scandinavia, these boards traveled with warriors to the grave, a testament to how deeply the game was woven into their identity. The rules of Hnefatafl were nearly lost to time, surviving only in fragmented sagas and scattered archaeological finds. But here's what we know. The king, stationed at the board's center, had one goal: escape to the safety of the board's edge, marked by ornate corner squares. His 12 defenders, outnumbered 2-1 by 24 attackers, had to shield him through a gauntlet of captures and ambushes. Pieces moved like rooks in chess, straight across the grid, but the brilliance lay in the asymmetry. The attacker's advantage in numbers forced the defenders to rely on cunning, using bottlenecks and sacrifice to buy their king precious time. A single misstep could mean collapse, just like a poorly planned raid. What's fascinating is how the game blurred the line between training and tradition. Viking youths likely honed tactical thinking by playing, learning to spot vulnerabilities in enemy lines or rally around a leader under pressure. The board itself was a microcosm of their worldview, a universe where imbalance was the norm and survival depended on adaptability. Some scholars believe Hnefatafl even held ritual significance, its outcomes seen as omens before battles or voyages. The game's legacy teetered on the edge of extinction after the Vikings' decline, nearly erased by chess's global spread. But in the 19th century, historians and game enthusiasts began piecing together its rules from old texts and carvings. Today, Hnefatafl thrives among strategy lovers who crave its unique tension. No dice, no luck, just pure nerve against overwhelming odds. When you play it now, you're not just moving pieces. You're stepping into the mind of a Viking, where every decision carries the weight of a king's survival, and the board becomes a battlefield in miniature. Before dawn broke over the forests of the Haudenosaunee people, players would gather, their wooden sticks cradled like sacred objects. This was Tuarathan, the creator's game, a ritual so powerful it could mend broken alliances, train warriors, and even shape the fate of nations. Far from the manicured fields of modern lacrosse, these matches unfolded across miles of open land, with hundreds, sometimes thousands of players surging toward goals set days' travel apart. The game wasn't just played, it was a living prayer, its every pass and sprint woven into the spiritual fabric of Native American life. The sticks themselves held deep significance. Crafted from hickory and strung with deer sinew, they were more than tools, they were extensions of the players' bodies, blessed by elders and often decorated with symbols of clan animals or celestial guides. The ball, made of leather stuffed with hair, represented the unity of earth and sky. When the game began, it wasn't with a referee's whistle, but with ceremonies invoking the creator's guidance. Players fasted and purified themselves in sweat lodges, understanding that victory depended as much on spiritual readiness as physical skill. Games could stretch for days, with brief pauses for rest or counsel, as the outcome carried consequences far beyond the field. A well-fought match might settle disputes between villages, replacing bloodshed with the catharsis of competition. What's astonishing is the game's scale. Early European observers wrote of matches involving entire tribes, where the field spanned forests and streams, and strategy resembled military maneuvers. French missionaries, who later named the sport lacrosse for its stick's resemblance to a bishop's crozier, were both awed and baffled by its intensity. Yet beneath the chaos lay intricate rules and honor codes. Striking an opponent with a stick was forbidden, tripping and wrestling were allowed, but only within strict bounds. The emphasis wasn't on domination but on balance, reflecting the Haudenosaunee belief in harmony between nations. Today's lacrosse carries whispers of this legacy. The Iroquois Nationals, a team representing Haudenosaunee communities, compete internationally with passports that acknowledge their sovereign identity. Before tournaments, players still burn sacred tobacco, and stick-making remains an art passed through generations. When you watch a modern lacrosse game, the speed and agility on display are tributes to those ancestral contests. But the true magic lies in the unbroken thread connecting the sport's ferocity to its roots, a reminder that some games don't just entertain. They heal, they teach, and they honor the sacred bond between past and present. The roar of 200,000 voices shook the Hippodrome of Constantinople as 4 chariots thundered down the Spina, their wheels nearly touching as they jostled for the lead. But this was no simple race, it was a battle for the soul of an empire. Byzantine chariot racing wasn't just sport. It was a high-stakes drama where the factions of the blues and greens became political parties, social movements, and even religious factions, their rivalries spilling from the track into the streets with terrifying consequences. Imagine a world where today's football hooligans could overthrow governments and star athletes held more sway than senators. That was the powder keg of the Hippodrome. At the heart of this frenzy were the factions, color-coded clans that transcended mere team loyalty. The blues, often backed by the aristocracy and aligned with Orthodox Christianity, clashed with the greens, who drew support from merchants and the lower classes, sometimes leaning toward fringe religious views. Emperors like Justinian knew their thrones depended on faction loyalty. His wife Theodora, a former actress with ties to the blues, famously intervened when a green insult nearly sparked a revolt. But the factions weren't just political tools, they were cultural forces. Members lived in faction-controlled neighborhoods, wore their colors daily, and even coordinated chants that turned the Hippodrome into a thunderous choir of dissent or praise. Then there were the charioteers, the rock stars of their age, men like Porphyrius, whose victories were carved into monuments comparing him to Achilles, commanded salaries that dwarfed those of generals. Their risky maneuvers, leaning into turns at death-defying angles, whipping opponents' horses, made them legends. Crowds threw flowers at their favorites and curses at their rivals, while scandals involving bribes or affairs fueled gossip for years. The fastest could rise from slavery to wealth, their faces adorning mosaics and their victories celebrated in poetry. But the race's dark side loomed just as large. In 532, a minor dispute over a green arrest erupted into the Nika riots, where faction members united to burn half the city and nearly topple Justinian's reign. The emperor's brutal suppression left 30,000 dead in the Hippodrome itself, its sands soaked in blood, yet even this didn't dull the faction's power. Races resumed days later, the cycle of adoration and fury unbroken. What's chilling is how familiar it all feels. The blind devotion to team colors, the cults of personality around athletes, the way arenas become stages for larger societal conflicts. The Hippodrome's echoes linger in every packed stadium today. When you see fans painting their faces or chanting in unison, remember, you're witnessing a tradition that once ruled empires, where the line between sport and survival was as thin as a chariot's wheel on the turn. Long before surfers in wetsuits chased perfect barrels off the coasts of California or Australia, the people of ancient Polynesia were carving a far deeper relationship with the ocean, one that blurred the line between sport and sacrament. In Hawaii, they called it hianalu, wave sliding, but this was no casual pastime. Every aspect of surfing, from the selection of the tree to the shaping of the board, was steeped in ritual. Picture a kahuna, a priest, standing knee-deep in the shallows, chanting over a freshly carved olo board, a massive, curved slab of wili or koa wood, some stretching up to 18 feet long. The chant wasn't just ceremony, it was a prayer to the gods of the sea, a plea for protection and favor in the unpredictable embrace of the waves. The boards themselves were markers of status and spirituality. Commoners rode shorter alea boards, agile but challenging, while chiefs and royalty commanded the colossal olo, their sheer size a testament to both physical prowess and divine connection. Shaping one was an act of reverence. Craftsmen sought out specific trees, offering gifts of fish and prayers before the first cut. The finished boards were stained with charcoal and turmeric, then anointed with coconut oil, transforming them from mere tools into sacred vessels. To paddle out on such a board wasn't just to ride a wave, it was to commune with Kanaloa, the god of the ocean, and to prove one's worth under the gaze of both mortals and deities. Surfing was also a theater of power. Hawaiian chiefs used their wave-riding skill to reinforce their authority, staging dramatic displays on the biggest swells. A ruler who could master the towering winter waves at breaks like Waimea or Honopialani demonstrated not just athleticism but mana, spiritual energy and legitimacy. Stories tell of chiefs like Kaiawa, who surfed with such grace that spectators believed the waves themselves obeyed him. Competitions were high-stakes affairs with land, resources, and even marriages wagered on the outcome. To lose wasn't just defeat, it could mean a loss of standing in a society where the ocean was both lifeblood and proving ground. Yet surfing's true magic lay in its egalitarian spirit. While chiefs had the finest boards, the sea itself was a great equalizer. Women surfed alongside men, a rarity in many ancient cultures, and legends speak of figures like Kelia, a Maui princess whose surfing prowess was celebrated in chants. The ocean didn't discriminate, it demanded respect, not rank. This balance between hierarchy and harmony made surfing a microcosm of Hawaiian values, a dance of discipline and freedom, tradition and spontaneity. When Western missionaries arrived in the early 19th century, they dismissed surfing as frivolous, even dangerous, and nearly erased it. But like a wave retreating only to gather strength, the tradition survived in hidden pockets, kept alive by a handful of families. Then, in the early 20th century, Hawaiian surfers like Duke Kahanamoku carried the art to the world, transforming it into a global phenomenon. Today's surf culture, with its reverence for the stoke and its obsession with the perfect wave, unknowingly echoes those ancient prayers. Every time a surfer paddles out, they're part of a lineage that stretches back to a time when riding a wave wasn't just a sport, it was a dialogue with the divine. The ocean's language hasn't changed, we've just forgotten some of the words. In the rolling hills of southern Africa, where the land stretches wide under endless skies, boys became men not through age alone, but through the sharp crack of wooden sticks meeting in midair. Nguni stick fighting, known as Ugkoko or Donga, was never just a game. It was a crucible, a ritual as old as the Zulu, Xhosa, and Ndebele peoples themselves, where young warriors proved their courage, discipline, and readiness to protect their communities. Picture the scene, a circle of elders and onlookers, their voices rising in rhythmic chants as two fighters, armed with a long attacking stick and a short defending one, danced forward in a blur of strikes and parries. The ground beneath them wasn't just dirt, it was sacred ground, a classroom where life's hardest lessons were taught through motion and muscle. The sticks themselves carried deep symbolism. Crafted from resilient hardwood like umzimbit or umgwenya, they weren't mere weapons but extensions of the fighter's spirit. The longer isaquili, used for offense, demanded precision and reach, while the shorter ubhoko, clutched in the opposite hand, taught the art of defense both in combat and in life. Matches were held during ceremonies like Umamulo, coming-of-age celebrations, or Umkosi Wakwishwama, first fruits festivals, where a young man's performance could elevate his family's standing or secure his place among future leaders. Victory wasn't about brutality, it was about control. A skilled fighter could disarm his opponent without drawing blood, earning respect through technique rather than force. But here's what's often overlooked. This tradition was as much about community as it was about combat. Elders didn't just judge the matches, they mentored. Every blocked strike taught patience, every counterattack strategy. The chants and songs that accompanied the fights weren't just cheers, they were oral histories, passing down the values of honor, resilience, and unity. Even the aftermath held meaning. Fighters who clashed fiercely in the ring would later share a gourd of Amosi sour milk, a reminder that conflict could end in reconciliation. Today, Nguni stick fighting has shed none of its power. In rural villages, boys still train under the watchful eyes of grandfathers, while urban tournaments blend tradition with modern spectacle. Organizations like Dilola Ngestishi, Play with Sticks in South Africa, have revitalized the practice, hosting events where fighters don traditional hides and feathers, their matches punctuated by drum beats and the stomping of feet. The rules have evolved. Head strikes are banned, and padded gear sometimes replaces bare skin, but the core remains. This is a language of respect, written in sweat and wood. When you watch a stick fighter pivot on his heel, deflecting a blow with a flick of his wrist, you're witnessing more than a sport. You're seeing a living thread to a time when courage wasn't measured in trophies, but in the willingness to stand tall, to learn, and to rise, again and again, no matter how hard the stick falls. Beneath the blossoming cherry trees of ancient Japan, where the air hummed with poetry and the rustle of silk, a different kind of performance unfolded, one where feet moved like whispers and a ball seemed to float on the breeze. This was Kemari, the gentle kick, a game so unlike the fierce competitions of China's Cuju or Rome's Harpastum that it felt less like sport and more like living art. Picture 8 nobles in layered robes, standing in a circle beneath the dappled light of a maple grove, their wooden clogs swapped for soft deerskin shoes as they passed a ball of supple leather without letting it touch the ground. No winners, no losers, just the shared pursuit of perfection, where every touch was a silent conversation between player and sky. Kemari's brilliance lay in its restraint. The ball, stuffed with barley grains to give it just the right weight, wasn't meant to be conquered but caressed. Players used only their feet, knees, and occasionally their heads, their movements choreographed to minimize force and maximize grace. The court, called a kikatsubo, was often scented with crushed herbs to sweeten the air, and the trees surrounding it were pruned to ensure dappled shade, a deliberate framing of beauty around the game's fluid rhythms. Unlike the raucous crowds of a Roman arena, Kemari spectators observed in hushed reverence, as if witnessing a tea ceremony in motion. What made Kemari extraordinary wasn't just its elegance, it was its philosophy. Rooted in Shinto ideals of harmony and purity, the game mirrored the Japanese concept of wa, the balance that underpinned all things. Players weren't competing against each other but collaborating with the ball, the wind, even the shifting light. A well-executed sequence where the ball arced seamlessly between players like a bird in flight was called tama no nagare, the flow of the jewel. To disrupt that flow with a clumsy kick was more than a mistake. It was a breach of etiquette, a discordant note in a shared symphony. The game's ties to aristocracy ran deep. Emperors like Murakami in the 10th century were famed for their Kemari skill, and the sport became a staple of courtly education, alongside calligraphy and incense appreciation. Manuscripts like the Kemari Henshiki detailed elaborate rules: how to bow before serving the ball, how to adjust one's sleeves mid-play, even which poems were appropriate to recite during pauses. Falling cherry petals were considered auspicious, their fleeting beauty a metaphor for the game's ephemeral perfection. Yet Kemari's true legacy is its quiet resilience. While many medieval pastimes faded, this one survived not through conquest or spectacle, but through sheer devotion. Today, shrines like Kyoto's Shimogamo host annual Kemari festivals, where players in Heian period costumes recreate the game with painstaking authenticity. Modern enthusiasts speak of its meditative quality, the way time seems to slow as the ball hovers between touches. In a world obsessed with speed and scores, Kemari offers something radical: the joy of motion for its own sake, a reminder that some victories aren't measured in points, but in moments of shared grace beneath the falling petals. High in the misty glens of the Scottish Highlands, where the wind carries the scent of heather and the echoes of clan battles long past, a game was born from the clash of ash wood and the thud of a leather ball striking frozen earth. Shinty, or Camanachd in Gaelic, wasn't just a sport. It was a way of life, a ritual as old as the standing stones dotting the landscape. Picture the scene: two teams of rugged Highlanders, their caman sticks curved like sabers and carved from resilient ash, gripped tight as they charged across open moorland, chasing a ball hardened by frost. The rules were simple but unforgiving. Play stopped for nothing, not the bite of winter, not the occasional brawl, not even the distant call of war, because in the Highlands, Shinty was war by other means. This was a game steeped in legend. Some say it arrived with the Irish Gaels, a cousin to hurling, brought across the sea by settlers who carried their sticks like sacred staffs. Others claim it sprang from the land itself, a test of skill and stamina for hunters tracking deer through the crags. By the Middle Ages, Shinty had become so ingrained in Gaelic culture that clan chiefs would halt feuds to host matches, using the game to settle disputes without bloodshed. The field became neutral ground where rival clans could measure strength and honor without drawing swords. A well-fought match might decide grazing rights, dowries, or even the fate of prisoners-losers walking away empty-handed, winners claiming more than pride. The equipment told its own story. A proper caman wasn't just carved, it was shaped over years, the wood soaked, bent, and dried to achieve the perfect curve. Balls, originally made from stuffed leather or hardened wood, could travel terrifying speeds. Early accounts speak of spectators ducking to avoid stray shots. Players wore no padding and injuries were badges of courage. Yet for all its roughness, Shinty demanded finesse. The best players could flick the ball onto the toe of their stick and sprint full tilt across uneven ground, balancing it like a dancer on a wire. What's remarkable is how Shinty survived against the odds. When the English crown cracked down on Highland culture after the Jacobite rebellions, banning Gaelic language and tartan, Shinty was nearly erased. But like the hidden whiskey stills in the hills, it persisted in secret, played in remote glens, passed down in whispers. By the 19th century, it re-emerged with organized clubs and codified rules, though the soul of the game stayed wild. Today, the Camanachd Cup final draws thousands to cheer teams like Kingussie or Newton Moore, their rivalries stretching back generations. But here's the magic: Shinty never lost its roots. Before big matches, players still gather to hear the Clarsach harp and Gaelic psalms. The toss of the coin isn't just a formality, it's a nod to the old ways where chance and skill were equally sacred. When you watch a modern Shinty match with its blistering pace and thunderous strikes, you're witnessing more than a sport. You're seeing a living thread to a time when the Highlands roared with independence, and every swing of the caman carried the weight of history. The game endures not because it's tame, but because it's not, a defiant echo of Gaelic spirit still ringing clear across the glens. The echoes of these ancient games ripple far beyond forgotten ball courts and buried game boards. They shaped the very foundations of civilization. Take the Olympic truce, where warring Greek city-states laid down their weapons to compete in honor of Zeus. This wasn't just a pause in conflict. It was a radical idea that sport could transcend politics, a concept that still lingers in today's Olympic ideals. Meanwhile, the Aztec ballgames courts doubled as diplomatic stages, where rival rulers settled disputes through ritual matches rather than bloodshed. The stakes, tributes, alliances, even the fate of captured warriors. These games were more than entertainment. They were the original peace treaties and power plays woven into the fabric of governance. Art and mythology, too, were forever altered by these contests. The Hindu epic Mahabharata describes dice games that decide kingdoms, their outcomes twisting the fates of heroes. Maya murals immortalize ball players mid-leap, their bodies frozen in a sacred dance between life and death. Even language bears their imprint. Our word, arena, comes from the Latin harina, the sand that soaked up blood in Roman gladiatorial combat, while checkmate traces back to the Persian shamat, the king is helpless, a phrase born from the chess-like game of shatranj. These games didn't just reflect culture, they became its vocabulary, shaping how societies understood strategy, chance, and destiny. Trade routes carried games like cargo, seeding connections across continents. Mancala boards carved by Swahili merchants became heirlooms in Arabian souks. The Roman Empire spread Harpastum like a virus, its chaotic energy infecting Gaulish and Germanic tribes. And when the Silk Road brought polo from Persia to China, it wasn't just a sport that traveled, it was an entire aesthetic. Tang dynasty poets rhapsodized about the wind beneath flying hooves, and emperors commissioned paintings of noble women playing in flowing robes, turning athleticism into high art. Games became silent ambassadors, carrying ideas about power, gender, and collaboration further than any army could march. Yet for all their beauty, these games also mirrored humanity's shadows. Viking stick fights could escalate into feuds, Aztec ball players sometimes paid with their lives, and Byzantine chariot races sparked riots that burned cities. This duality is their lasting lesson. Play can unite or divide, heal or harm, depending on the hands that hold it. Modern sports still wrestle with this legacy, the hooliganism echoing Byzantine faction wars, the doping scandals mirroring ancient Olympians' desperate quests for glory. What endures, though, is the primal truth these games reveal, that competition and community are two sides of the same coin. When a Maori warrior performs a haka before a rugby match or a Japanese sumo wrestler purifies the ring with salt, they're not just honoring tradition, they're touching something timeless. These rituals remind us that the urge to test ourselves, to bond through shared struggle, is written into our DNA. The stadiums may be steel now, the balls synthetic, but the heartbeat beneath them is as old as civilization itself. The next time you lace up sneakers or cheer a last-minute goal, remember, you're not just playing a game, you're stepping into a story thousands of years in the telling. These 28 ancient games and ritual sports reveal something profound. Play is never just play. It's a language older than written words, a way for cultures to speak their deepest values, fears, and dreams. Whether it's the sacred courts of Mesoamerica, where a rubber ball symbolized the sun's journey, or the icy fields where Viking warriors tested their mettle in Knattleikr, these games were never mere distractions. They were survival training, spiritual rites, and political chessboards all at once. The next time you watch a soccer match, think of China's Cuju players kicking leather balls 2,000 years ago. Or when you roll dice, remember the Aztec nobles who gambled their freedom on Patoli, believing the gods themselves dictated the outcome. What's astonishing is how these ancient contests still shape us. The Olympic flame, a direct descendant of the sacred fire that burned for Zeus, the tension of a last-minute goal. It echoes the life or death stakes of the Maya's bull. Even our love for underdog stories like the lone gladiator standing against impossible odds traces back to Rome's blood-soaked arenas. These games taught us how to win with honor, lose with grace, and find meaning in the struggle. They turned chaos into rules, conflict into ceremony, and in doing so, they helped build civilizations. But here's the real magic. These traditions aren't relics, they're alive. Hurling players in Ireland still wield ash wood sticks like their Celtic ancestors. Japanese children learn Kemari's gentle art in schoolyards, and in the Andes, descendants of the Inca play a version of their ancestors' relay races, where runners carried messages across mountains like human telegraphs. The thread connecting us to those players is unbroken, a reminder that the urge to compete, to ritualize, to play, is as human as breathing. So tell us, which of these games resonated with you? Was it the cosmic drama of the Mesoamerican ball game, or the quiet strategy of Go, where a single stone could shift the balance of power? Drop your favorites in the comments, and if you're hungry for more deep dives into history's forgotten corners, hit that subscribe button. This isn't just a channel, it's a time machine, and you're holding the controls. Until our next adventure, keep questioning, keep exploring, and never forget, every game you play is part of a story that began millennia before you were born. The past isn't dead, it's waiting for you to pick up the ball, the dice, or the stick and keep playing.